Jesus Christ, you look terrific, the mayor blurted out. Give this fella some water, please, he told his assistant. Vodley drank the entire bottle in one go. His furs looked disheveled and dirty, and his ears flattened against his head. The mayor had never seen Vodley in such a state. He didn't know how their race normally looked like when they are exhausted, but he didn't think he needed a PhD in biology to know how exhausted he was. Daniel! The Gauls are coming, Vodley stammered. The Gauls? Daniel lifted his eyebrow. We were planning to repay your deeds since then, however. There were some problems in our community, politics and such. I will spare you the detail, but when our problem had solved, and when we set to find the humans again, they already left. The chief paused, and before he could continue, a voice rang out from one of the group. The third contact team. My granddaddy was in that group and told me about the first contact with them elves. He assisted the follow-up aid program till the team reckoned they had done enough. What are they planning? Daniel thought. Bring it on! Flap. The mages flicked the tarp away, revealing the items that the Gaul had brought from their homeland. The items to pay back the action of the human's ancestor. It were sacks of grains. There were so many grains that some of them leaked into the ground. Daniel and the rest of the group could do nothing but gawked at the sight. I still remember when your ancestor, well, more like your grandfather, visited our homeland for the first time. The chief started recounting his past. The chief. Mom, I brought food with me. He showed her his basket filled with breads. The mother looked at the basket for a moment with teary eyes, before quickly smacking the little boy in the head. You fool, son of mine. Don't go running off from the house without giving me a notice next time. You scared me. The chief looked at the two son and mother in the distance. Well, it looks like you humans are in a pretty bad shape. Don't worry, we would certainly help. I would die of guilt if I don't, the teary mother asked the chief. I looked at one of them, and they look exactly like how my brother had described, including the ugly part. He mumbled the last part again. I didn't know what the humans were planning, but giving us foods and water was not in my expectation. I just thought that they were passing by and maybe have some extra foods at hand. Yet, after that encounter, the humans keep coming back, and each time they brought more food than the last. They feed us, share some story with us, and then, when the food's condition is stable, they left. I was only 175 years old at that time when my brother told me that there were a new race that had visited. They look eerily similar to us, but they're short, both in height and in ears. He paused, and they also a bit more ugly than us. He mumbled that last part. I wanted to see this new race, but I couldn't. I was starving, and so is everyone in the village. It was a miracle that my brother was able to walk and spotted the humans. I didn't have to worry about not being able to see a new race, however, because the humans decided to pay a visit. But the aid team didn't send that much. The aid was little. Your little aid saved my life and the entire village. Calling it a little aid is like calling a mall a slightly aggressive dog. The chief scoffed. Unpack the cargo! It's time for our retribution! A middle-aged, thin woman with a short, curly black hair stepped out from the group. The chief twitched upon hearing the word elves, but he quickly brushed it over. Your grandfather? Can I meet him? The chief asked with clear excitement. The woman replied by shaking his head. Unfortunately, my granddaddy dies on the old age of 81, 2 decades ago. Heart attack. Her expression turned gloomy. Ah, my condolence. I forgot that you're kind live mom. A shout came from the back of the caravan. A boy in a plain white shirt ran and lunged toward her. The two hugged for a while. Damn elves. Ordo heard a small voice from the group. He smirked. These humans truly hadn't changed since they last met decades ago. I have come here to repay what your ancestor had done to us. The chief stepped aside, presenting his mages, standing proud and tall in front of the caravan. Even the humans with their terrible magic could feel the power coming from the mages. And we have decided to repay it by tenfold, the chief chuckled as he snapped his finger. The mages put their hands on the wagon behind them. Daniel had offered Vodley a way to escape along with the refugees, but he refused. A guard called Vodley to descend from the watchtower and go to the town gates. Vodley steeled himself for what to come. 23:55, Gauls ETA. 5 minutes. I see they have been expecting our arrival. The chief looked at the gathered men and women, with some Cato amongst them. The chief Ordo walked toward the nervous groups of humans. His tall figure loomed over the group. The moonlight shone from behind, casting a terrifying shadow on his face. They nodded, and they dragged the kid into the back. Vodley could only look in despair as he saw the little boy disappear into one of the wagon. God know what they will do to him. Blood dripped from his paws as his claws dug into them. He really wanted to pick up his rifle and shot the Gaul who dragged the little boy like a trash. But he couldn't for a reason, the same reason that the town guards, what left of them anyway, didn't attack the advancing Gaul. They had little to no ammunition. When Daniel gathered the remaining town guards, he found a huge problem. From the 300 towns guard, 270 had been sent to help the Catfolk war. Most of their rifles had either been lent or sold to pay their debt. They had even lent their planes to pay off the debt for the food shortages. And he even doubted if he could call his remaining ammunition stockpile a stockpile, for the remaining ammunition didn't even form a pile. And so, the mayor had made a grim decision. When the town had been fully evacuated, the remaining people would gather to negotiate a surrender with the invaders. "Where are you from? Why are you here?" she asked. But the kid didn't reply. "Answer the question, you uncle." "He is just a kid," she scolded his uncle. "New Arlington." "I am from New Arlington." The kid suddenly spoke. "My mother was hungry, so I came here looking." She looked at the ground and saw a small basket. There were a couple of tinka fruits there, but they were small and few. She looked at her husband with a frown. The chief Ordo shook his head and turned to his guards. "Bring him to the back and end his suffering. We could deal with the whole repayment thing later. The evacuation is the most important thing right now," Daniel thought. "Now, for our defense, 23 o'clock, Gauls ETA. 1 hour. We found a human." A shout came from the back. The chief turned to look and saw his wife holding a human kid in the air. The kid looks young, probably around 12 to 13 years old. He was thin, and his eyes looked empty. He wore a messy, plain white cloth that was covered in so many dirt and mud that it turned brown. He looked so thin, the chief wife inspected the kid. As much as the chief wanted to go without a break, he knew the limits of his people. The chief looked toward the east, to the great open plain. There were nothing except grass for as long as the eyes can see, but if you squint hard enough, you could see walls and tall buildings right in the horizon. The chief took a deep breath before nodding to his companion. The resting time is over, for they had no time to waste. A couple of minutes later, the wall started to move toward the town. Meanwhile, the situation in the town was eerily similar to that time the last tomato crop in this world withered away, mass panic and hysteria. The people of the caravans didn't seem to be bothered by the situation they were in. Nobody complained, for they were all focused on their quest, a quest that they had determined to finish no matter what. They were so fixated on their quest that they did not notice the figure hidden on the trees. It had been following the caravan from the moment they entered the forest. The figure's sensitive ears heard the caravan chatters well. It heard them talk retribution towards the humans and payback for what the apes did several times. Daniel was surprised with the support the town had received. While he certainly welcomed their help, he was still worried. How were they going to pay their support back? The town had been impacted by a crop failure last month, and the town was in debt. Perhaps it's because the agricultural knowledge from Earth did not fully apply here, or maybe it's because there were not a lot of farmers coming from Earth. But the fact is that the crops around the area had been failing recently. Even their Korean neighbor had trouble with their food condition. "You mean the elves?" Daniel. I know Daniel rolled his eyes. His assistant worried too much. But except for their looks and other minor details, they are practically elves, Juan, he stated. "It doesn't matter, Daniel. Gauls hated that name." "Certainly you remember the story, right?" "Yes, I remember Juan." The story that Juan was referring to was the story of the human first contact with Gauls. When the UN First Contact Team, along with the company, encountered Gauls, they showed them elves from books and shows. The Middle District had been evacuated. Juan burst into the room. He tried his best to not step on the papers strewn around on the floor as he walked toward the table where Daniel and the town guards were busy talking. "Right, so the Artil." "Oh yes, Juan. It's good that now you are here." "The Middle District had been evacuated, you say?" the disheveled mayor asked him. "Yes, Daniel. The church, the TAG, Terra Aviation Group, and even the Korean are helping the evacuation." Juan listed the organizations that had helped. "Calm down, man!" Daniel tried to calm him down. They had been friends together since childhood, well before Daniel ascended to his position. This is the second time he had seen the calm and patient Juan break down and lost his composure. The first time he had seen him losing his composure was when the last tomato withered away, and they could no longer make BBQ sauce. But Daniel could understand his breakdown. They had seen most of their army as an expeditionary force to fight along with the catfolk just like the others. The Gauls were quite pissed that the humans would relate their people to the disgusting and egomaniac elves. The chief was so angry that he reportedly kicked one of the company agents straight in the face before smashing the laptop that was showing The Witcher to the ground. Who would have thought that showing a prideful and arrogant race that their race are prideful and arrogant were a good idea? Wagons. The two-man argument stopped. There were a lot of wagons, Daniel. They brought some quite powerful mages, and some of them brought rifles as well. Maybe them lads from the church got into the church, had just signed the treaty with the pagans, and their base are far away from their homeland. So were the Islamic League up the north. He answered. And beside they, the UN, and practically every human nation and organization are busy helping the catfolk war, including us. Well, maybe the Gauls had no. Daniel, it is not possible. The Gauls are the lizard's biggest enemy. There are no reasons for their attack. Juan clutched his head. He was on the verge of tears. 21 o'clock, Gauls ETA, 3 hour. If someone had decided to visit the forest outskirt that night, they would see a wall stretching from the field to the forest itself. Yet, if they looked at the wall more carefully, they would notice that it was not made out of stone, but wagons, carts, and Gauls. Gauls were milling around, fixing broken wheels, cooking, and resting. Their excited chit-chat filled the silent night. They had taken a rest for a while. Everyone was tired when they exited the forest, so the chief allowed the caravan to take some rest. They were not worried about invasion, for New Arlington was near the edge of the Shakar forest and was surrounded by the Koreans. Yet they never expected an attack coming from the forest, let alone an invasion from the Gauls. But Daniel didn't let that stop him. He had been sworn to protect the people of this town, and he would not break his oath. Call the others. Take the remaining guards and call every reserve. I want this town evacuated by midnight. Daniel patted Juan on the back. Let's go, Juan. We have so much to do. It had hurt enough. The figures scurried away from the pathway. Once it was far enough, it ran without stop toward the town he had lived on for the past 2 years. After an hour of running without stop, it finally arrived in the bustling town of New Arlington. It passed through the heavily decorated southern gate and went straight to the mayor's building. The mayor, who had been busy in his work, looked up to see a familiar face. Ah, Vodley. You look like you just got chased by a Moor. Vodley didn't answer his comment as he was too busy catching his breath. Vodley informed the two stunned man. I don't know what were they planning, but they talked a lot about how they will pay back the apes. Vodley described his experience in the forest. I estimate that they would reach our gates in 6 hours. A sense of dread befell the room. To the 2 men and 1 Cato in the room, it felt like time had stopped. Juan? Daniel asked his trusted assistant. Had we, or others humans, attacked the Gauls? Daniel looked at Juan for an answer. No, Daniel, he replied firmly. Are you sure, Juan? Chief Ordo. The 2nd of June 2111. The forest of Shakar was a quiet place. The animals there were silent, and travelers barely passed through. There was a small pathway that had not been used since ages, for no one in their right mind would venture this deep into the forest. Some said that the forest was haunted, while others said a large mythical Draka, hungry for blood, lived in the area. In the early morning of June 2111, the forest's silence was interrupted by a large caravan. Wagons filled to the brim, with hundreds of people carrying swords, staffs, and even rifles for some, descended upon the small, unkept pathway.